A year ago to this day, I made a video comparing the best consoles to mod in 2018. In that video, I compared the original Xbox, the Wii, and the PlayStation 3. A lot of things have changed since then, as well as my interests, which is why in today's video I'm going to take a look at which of these consoles I've been playing the most over the last year and which one I think would provide you the most value as well as the ease to actually mod. Now, as we discussed in that video, the Wii is by far the easiest of the consoles to mod. You can use really any Wii that has the Gamecube ports on. It's doable with just an SD card, which makes it be by far the simplest method, and the games can be played off of a USB thumbstick, which of course I'm sure you have tons of those USB drives laying around that you could sacrifice to shove into the Wii and put some games on. So if you can get behind the gimmicky controls of the Wii remote as you navigate the menus to get to whatever Wii homebrew or GameCube ISOs that you want to play, the Wii is by far the easiest solution. The PlayStation 3 has become even more hackable than it was when I made that video a year ago, where it was kind of limited what consoles were actually compatible with the mods that were out at the time. Now all up-to-date firmware and all consoles are moddable for the PlayStation 3. Now, the disappointing thing about the PlayStation 3, I believe, is that there isn't really much of a homebrew scene going on there. There is some emulators available. None of them are particularly good. I wouldn't recommend any of them. So mostly what you're going to get when you mod a PlayStation 3 is access to playing backup PS3 games as well as backup PS2 and PS1 games, which obviously is in itself a great perk. If you have a PlayStation 3 modded today, which is relatively easy because it does only require a USB drive, but the process is a bit more complex and involved than it is on the Wii. Again, though, simple hardware required. What you're really getting access to with the PlayStation 3 is the entire library of PlayStation games that came before it. Like I said, it can play the PlayStation 1, PlayStation 2, and PlayStation 3, so it does give you access to a huge library of PlayStation games. If you do go ahead and get a PlayStation 3 these days, I would only recommend the slim model. The super slim model isn't necessarily bad, but the disk drive is pretty awful, and the fat model I would most definitely stay away from, as so many of them seem to be dying here in 2019. Then of course the last one, and my favorite and most played of these modded consoles over the last year, is the original Xbox. This bad boy has compatibility with all sorts of emulators. The homebrew scene on this thing was deep. The user interface is heavily improved after it's modded, and just overall, I believe the original Xbox provides the best experience. However, the original Xbox is a bit complicated to mod, and if you want to get yourself into that, you're definitely going to have to be willing to, I guess, put in the time and spend the money to buy the tools that you will need. Now, don't get intimidated by the cost. I think you can probably get the whole thing put together for less than $50 relatively easily, but it definitely does require some more parts. The process of soft modding this and actually getting the console modded doesn't require you to open up the console, but then once you got it soft modded, you only have an 8GB hard drive by default, so that's why it's very important to upgrade the hard drive on the original Xbox internally, which then requires you to open up the console, and the process thus becomes more involved, and you probably shell out another $35. Now you're $50 into it, and you didn't even, you already had the console to begin with, so you're looking at the cost of the console if you don't own it already, and then another $50. So it gets to be a bit more expensive of a process in comparison to the PlayStation 3 or the Wii. Now, I don't want to talk very much about the PlayStation 3 because I think it is relatively straightforward in what you're getting. Like I said, the emulator compatibility is pretty poor, and I would not buy a PlayStation 3 to play emulators on. I would buy it only if I was looking for PlayStation 1, PlayStation 2, PlayStation 3 games all wrapped up in one console, and for doing that in a straightforward sense, the PlayStation 3 is great. Now, the Wii, however, gives you access to a lot more things. The Wii has some great emulators available for it. Now, maybe not as wonderful as the ones on the original Xbox, but you're still getting compatibility with the NES, the SNES, some compatibility with the Nintendo 64, though I believe the original Xbox can run it better. You're also getting, of course, the Game Boy, Game Boy Color, Game Boy Advance, and then all sorts of other smaller consoles, different Atari iterations, things like that that I personally would not be interested in, but are available on the Wii. But something I've spoke very highly of that I really like about the Wii is its GameCube compatibility. Like I said, you can only mod those Wiis that have the GameCube ports on, which is also great because then you can plug in GameCube controllers. Now you can get off-brand GameCube controllers relatively cheap these days, but buying GameCubes and GameCube games, in particular, especially the good GameCube games, can get awfully pricey, which is why the ability to play ISOs and backups on these Wiis is a wonderful thing. And to store these games, like I said, you can just put them on a USB flash drive, which I think is simple enough for a lot of people when you look at tutorials online of how to do this. So the fact that the Wii can play those GameCube games is a fantastic plus to me. Then you add in the library of Wii games, which, though flooded with shovelware, does have some great games in it, as well as there being some okay homebrew games for the Wii. There isn't really any homebrew games for the Wii that I would consider particularly noteworthy, but there is some fan-modded games for the Wii that I would say are worth playing. Two of them come to mind immediately for me. One of them is actually a GameCube game, and it's a 2-player mod for Super Mario Sunshine. I have heard that this plays relatively well. I have not tried it myself, but in watching gameplay online, I've noticed that this seems like it would be a worthwhile thing to play with a friend, especially if you'd never played Super Mario Sunshine to begin with. Now, the second one, and I think the most notable one, is Project M, which is a mod for Super Smash Bros. Brawl that makes the game play more like Melee and adds a lot of additional content. People have described this as the biggest fan mod ever in the history of gaming. It is that big of a mod. I believe it even may add a few different iterations of stages, so it's definitely something that's worth checking out if you're into Super Smash Bros. And of course, Super Smash Bros. Brawl definitely has a lot of controller compatibility, from being compatible with the GameCube controllers to the Wii gamepads to the Wii controllers themselves. So there's a lot of different ways to get into playing Brawl on your Wii, and with the Project M, it potentially makes it be better to play on your Wii than playing an old copy of Melee through the GameCube emulation. So here we are. It's been a year since I made that video. My verdict is still kind of undecided. I will say that without a doubt, I have played my original Xbox the most in the last year. There's no questioning that. There's just so much content that I can play on it between the original Xbox games and then the older games that it tends to emulate so well. However, I think it really depends on what you're looking for out of your modded console. If you're looking heavy on emulators, the Wii and the original Xbox are the way to go. If you're a PlayStation fan, the PlayStation 3 is definitely the way to go. And if you're looking to just get it done in a real easy fashion and are willing to have a USB drive tackily hanging out at the back end, the Wii is the one to go with, no doubt. Thank you guys for watching. I'm Bailey, and I will see you in the next video.